Hello there. Welcome back to the City Till We Die podcast for episode number 5. You join myself, Ben Ambrose, and my co-host Adam Harvey to talk about Norwich City and the very scary challenge that lies ahead. It's been 16 years. I don't know how Norwich are going to defend the record, but they're going to give it a go. We're going to sit and watch it. Adam's going, I'm not. But before we get into all of the weird and wonderful intricacies of the Old Farm derby, we have to talk a little bit about Norwich City's game midweek against West Brom. Also, some more news that has just sort of been announced from a commercial perspective by the club. We'll have a little bit of a chat about that. We won't go too crazy. And then, we'll move on to Norwich versus Ipswich. And every time I think of it, my heart just starts beating really quickly. I think this is the most nervous I've been, but we'll park that for now, for as long as we can, until we almost have to then talk about it, because it's the blockbuster of the weekend for Norwich and Ipswich fans. But yeah, we will get there slowly but surely. Adam, first and foremost, after Norwich City's game midweek, we were both there. How you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, it was a strange one. It was like the best performance, or probably the most rounded performance over the 90 they've had all season, yet the outcome is much the same. It was almost kind of role reversal of what Norwich have been doing away from home at the moment, what West Brom done to them, just sort of the one shot on target, they take it and defended all the opportunities. Their goalkeeper was on top form for a few of those big saves at different points within the game. And yeah, unfortunately for Norwich and for Liam Manning, it was the same outcome, and that sort of deflated feeling at Carrow Road that we mentioned over the last podcast, and the sort of need, I guess, for a home win, 3 points, and kind of that sort of positive feeling around the home stadium. And we're still yet to see that. And I think, it's going to be, another 2 or 3 weeks, of course, with the international break after this block of games, and then that sort of big meeting against Liam Manning's former team, providing that he sort of makes it past the weekend. I'm not sort of wanting to sort of bring doom to his door, but I think that's a big game, and one that might be quite decisive on his future on Sunday, given kind of the magnitude of how big that game is, and as we're going to talk about, and sort of the recent results. And heaven forbid Norwich don't get a positive, or even if they lose the game in a heavy fashion, then it's going to be tough, I think, for Norwich fans, and even those maybe who are most positive to stay on board. So yeah, difficult situation, difficult moment they're in. But obviously you've got to try and cling on to the positives of Wednesday moving into this big game on Sunday.
So let's look at the West Brom game in isolation. You mentioned that it was almost roles reversed in terms of the way Norwich City played at home against away opposition. Completely echo that sentiment. You look at the stats, they dominated possession, they had way more shots on target. And the general feel of the game, because stats are one thing, but watching it is another. The general feel of the game was that Norwich, they did have a lot of the ball. I agree that they looked better rounded. My review after the game was quite downtrodden because of that. The nature of losing at home for what is now a record 5th defeat in a row at Carrow Road, and credit to NCFC numbers as always for these wonderful stats. In their 123-year history, this is the first time that has happened. And to be honest with you, when I read that, I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. That is really just the state of play at Carrow Road at the moment. So, Adam, in terms of that performance, let's try and be positive. What are you taking from that going forward? Because the draw against Stoke gave us that goal. It gave us sort of a very minimal sample of what Norwich City can do at their best. When you look at this game where Norwich City created more chances, they just couldn't score. Some wonderful saves from the West Brom goalkeeper towards the end of the game. And what do you take from it as a Norwich City fan? Who I think we're pretty similar at the moment, aren't we? Where we feel just almost down and out. What do you take from the game from a positive perspective?
I think they probably built a little bit on maybe some of those patterns of play we mentioned in the last podcast, of sort of way they sort of, I guess, made and created that goal at Stoke. There was more positives in that sense, I think, on Wednesday. Jack Stacey sort of getting in good advanced positions, and sort of situations where Norwich actually had the ball in the box, rather than sort of maybe being reliant on individual Josh Sargent pulling them out of somewhere and finding the back of the net, or sort of pot shots from distance. There was a lot more sort of opportunity within the 18-yard box, rather than sort of outside the box, or as I say, sort of reliant on individual quality, which I think that's positive. Clearly, the defensive side of it as well, as much as we maybe, or Norwich haven't generally shipped as many goals this season maybe as last year, that's not really been necessarily down to all of their own doing. It's been more that opposition teams haven't really taken their chances, or Vlad's pulled out, a number of wonderful saves, goalkeeper who's now picked up the Norwich City Player of the Month award, as I think we both expected on the last podcast. And it was almost, that roles reversed, as we both said. And I think, defensively, they were a little bit more tight. There was a few moments maybe towards the end of the game where Norwich were obviously chucking bodies forward and they left themselves a little bit short at the back, and West Brom could capitalise in numbers. But over the sort of piece, I didn't really feel too threatened by West Brom, given some of the quality they have in attacking areas, and Josh Madger returning, finding his first goal of the season. Unfortunately for us, as we mentioned on the last podcast, he's a man who hadn't scored to this point. But it wasn't really a goal that, Norwich got cut open again. It was kind of just one of them which, it's a bit unlucky. Vlad had to kind of palm it out. Unfortunately, it landed at the feet of Madger, who was always going to tuck it away. And it's just frustrating. I mean, and the feeling within the ground is probably the sort of barometer almost of that, kind of such a quiet place. The numbers and the attendance spoke for itself, and I don't know, fans, you can sort of feel the apathy starting to build. It almost kind of at a level now where I almost think back to maybe Dean Smith's sort of last games at Carrow Road, and maybe the fans feeling disconnected a bit and sort of expecting the worst, and almost the inevitable was round the corner, and it was almost like why we sort of prolonging this misery, and that's kind of where we're at a little bit at the moment. And I'm not one to be too reactive. And I know it's early days with Liam Manning, and it's only 8 games in the season. It's difficult to make a firm judgment, and clearly the overhaul of the squad was massive in the summer, and that takes time, and I sort of appreciate that. However, last year, again, we've said it numerous times now, there was enough positives there to feel that this was moving forwards. This project at the moment under Liam Manning, I haven't seen enough positives. Even on Wednesday night, I didn't see enough really to cling on to and think this is heading in the right direction. Norwich are going to start moving up the table rather than down.
I mean, last season, I wasn't actually, I wasn't actually at the Portsmouth at home game, so I didn't quite get to taste the bitterness around Carrow Road then. But for me, it never felt as bad last season at any point compared to this season. There really is some worrying times ahead, and there's so many things I want to address there. The first thing is I do just want to address some comments, and mostly I've just been having conversations with people agreeing about how Norwich are so poor in certain areas and whose fault is what, and etc. But I have seen a few comments which I think are totally fair about me being quite negative. Yeah, that's how I feel. If you don't like it, maybe don't watch. We're always up for the discussion, but I did just want to mention that because that's just how we feel. That is, we're not trying to spread misinformation and try and turn the fans against Norwich City. If you're going to Carrow Road at the moment, it's not a nice place to be, and it is not a nice feeling, especially when we've been coming home from these games. A 5th loss in a row, first time in Norwich City's history. That is just where we are. But looking back at the game, we talked up the Madger goal, didn't we? We said it would be about right for him to grab his first, and he did. But I do want to touch on your point of the goal. I look at it and I don't feel angry at Liam Manning necessarily like I have been with previous goals where it looks like our system is just being picked to pieces. For me, it's an individual error from Callum Fisher. It's a reckless attempt at a tackle. He then, puts himself out of the game, easy ball in. Vlad sort of does what he can do. I'm not going to pick a fault on him because he's been the player of the month. Cordoba, ball watching, and Madger's there Cordoba sort of pokes it, didn't he? And Madger's there to finish. And I mean, that was just before Norwich were building a little bit of momentum, and we were starting to see, dare I call it, some slick football, getting the ball up the pitch. And, we saw a lot of the ball retention. We saw a lot of the horseshoe football, but I think in the first 25 minutes, it didn't feel too bad. The atmosphere at Carrow Road wasn't great, but it wasn't silent, nor was it irate. It was just people talking. And I mentioned this in my review, that the conversation I had with my dad was just about how not very well we were playing, and the conversations around me very much the same. I can only imagine the conversations echoing around Carrow Road were of a similar nature. So that is where we are. You mentioned apathy creeping in. It's a dangerous place to be, and the attendance speaks for itself. It's the lowest league attendance at a game at Carrow Road for 14 years. And the irony, yeah, well, I don't know if it's reaching an irony, but it was after a win against Bristol City. The worst place Norwich City fans can be in is that state of mind where you just can't be bothered. That is where it's almost done. Now, I can't imagine it, to be honest with you, Adam. I can't imagine Norwich City fans just, in their thousands stopping. That's just not what Norwich fans do. It's just not, in my time as a Norwich City fan, I've been a season ticket holder for 20 years. I've seen us in League One. That is just not how things went. In League One, the average attendance was slightly above the attendance on Wednesday night. And I can't even fathom the idea of not wanting to go to the football. I'll whinge about it and I'll laugh about it. I'll not literally, but cry about it. But I'll never think, I'm not going unless, some major event has happened. I will always go to Carrow Road. But I'm sure there's 25,000 other people who are exactly the same. But when you reach the point where you just think, I can't bother to go, I've got better things to do, that is a dangerous place that this new ownership group find themselves in, and the news that has just come out really doesn't support that. But as I said, we'll park that and come on to it. Norwich City's chances then, Adam, 16 shots, 5 on target. I've picked out 3 as what probably should have been goals. Norwich's XG compared to West Brom's was 1.6 for Norwich, 1 for West Brom. We know football's not played on XG. I've got Harry Darling's first half chance right in front of me, a Shane Duffy special where he's just blazed it over from close range. You've got Makama's header from the Mahovo cross. Mahovo, great to see him back. And you've got that Sienat's effort smothered by the West Brom goalkeeper. Is that positive? Are we happy about that? Are we looking at that as chances that Norwich City carved out well? Are we thinking, okay, here we go, we're starting to create some chances, or was it maybe down to the poor quality of West Brom? Because I thought West Brom were, I'll be honest with you, I thought they were really poor.
Yeah, they were. They're probably the most bang average team I'd say we've played at home this season. I think Millwall, I know their form has tailed off, subsequently since, but they look like a well-coached team, a well-drilled team, and difficult to break down, and you're never really going to play a Millwall side, particularly under Alex Neil. Norwich fans are well aware of that you're going to create endless opportunities and score loads of goals. Middlesbrough, as the table shows at the moment, are flying high, and clearly Rob Edwards has got them going, and a lot of that core group of players has been there a while, and sort of has that sort of ceiling to be good championship potential, top end players. Wrexham was probably the one that I hoped and expected Norwich to create more opportunities against, given their struggles defensively this season up to the game we had there at the back end of September, and that just didn't pan out in the way that they expected. And I think that's why that warranted the response and the negativity that game ended up bringing, and sort of the head loss, I guess, that most fans had. And the feeling and the frustration after that one was a lot more rife than what it was on Wednesday night, because, I thought West Brom were pretty poor, albeit, as much as, they were poor. Norwich, yes, they were better opportunities. Were they clear-cut opportunities? And, Norwich on most occasions would score them. Some maybe less so than others. I mean, Makama's header is a cracking save from the goalkeeper. I thought he was, again, excellent when he came on the pitch, and he's one that I'm looking for Sunday, thinking that Norwich have got to get him involved. He's that different option that, he gives them something completely different to what else they've got in those attacking areas. And he was positive when he came on again. Darling, probably the one man on the pitch you don't really want the ball falling to in those situations. If that was sort of a Josh Sargent or, Antti Sienats maybe in maybe last season's sort of mould rather than this season at the moment, you'd have probably backed them to find a net there. And again, it's Griffiths providing himself with a great save there for Sienats. So, they're creating more opportunities. I still think they need more, and they need to be more clear-cut opportunities where 9 times out of 10 the ball ends up in the back of the net, because that's the only formula I think that Norwich are going to have at the moment where they can start to climb the table, because unfortunately, they almost seem to be on the sort of wrong end by 1 goal at the moment, and it is frustrating because they're not really getting sort of, well, as much as they're getting battered in terms of maybe the XG against it in some of these games. Unfortunately, if you look at the scorelines, it is literally often being decided by 1 goal, it was just kind of the worst position to be in, because it's just so frustrating that it could be so different. And Wednesday could have been very different if one of those finds the back of the net, and then Norwich probably used that momentum and that confidence to go and go and win the game. And I think that is bleeding into it a little bit. Some of these players that maybe haven't scored for a while, the likes of Seeing, that's probably the pressure that's on his shoulders at the moment. He'll admit himself he's not been up to scratch so far this season, but it's one of them where you just think if he gets one in the back of the net and he finds that goal, he probably will then go on a little bit of a run. We saw it last season, so hopefully that will come. Unfortunately, probably not the perfect game coming on the horizon for that tap.
So before we wrap up on the West Brom game, I'll just make one last point, which is the positive impact of the substitutions. You've got Mahovo, Jurasek, Topic when he came on, almost carved out that chance he did carve out that chance for seeing that, didn't he? Makama, all had a positive impact as far as positivity will take you. It's the main one from that for me is Mahovo and that natural balance that he will restore that Norwich have been desperate for since Ben Crisene got injured. For me, that's it on the game. Let's move on. Let's look forward because, depending on how Norwich City approach the next period of time, we could fall into the trap of rinse and repeat. So, Adam, moving on. East Anglian derby, 16 years unbeaten. Before we get into the game itself on Sunday and previewing where both Norwich and Ipswich currently sit in the table and the context around them, I want to... because the past 16 years, despite our current mood, have actually been quite fun in terms of the East Anglian derby, that is. What is your... And let's look at it from a wider point of view, because I want to talk about something that will make me smile. What is your favourite East Anglian derby moment?
I think it's probably, in isolation, because of the meaning of the game, it's got to be the Carrow Road 2015 playoff semi-final second leg, 3-1. I think heading into that one, obviously the 1-1 draw previously the week before at Portman Road had maybe not done anything to settle any Norwich fans' nerves, because as much as maybe Norwich were the favourites, and you look at that squad and the quality and the calibre that some of those individuals had, and maybe the expectation was always there for Norwich probably to go on and win that game and reach Wembley. There's always that sort of bit of you in the back of your mind, particularly in a derby game where, the cliche is anything can happen and form goes out the window, and it's maybe not so much around who's on the pitch, it's just about which players maybe deal with the pressure. And obviously that is probably the most pressure derby there's been in, certainly recent history, maybe going back to sort of the Milk Cup days of semi-finals and sort of some of the big meetings there. For Norwich to win that in that fashion, particularly because of the fact that, they conceded one after they went one up, and sort of that feeling against 10 men, or how's this going to end up, to then sort of almost easy. It was easy really in the end, the way that they sort of managed to do it in the scenes after the game. For me, that's the one that sticks out in my memory. Probably away from that, there's been a few. The Bradley Johnson one in that season as well at Carrow Road was always there just for the quality of that goal, and shout out to Chris Gorham for the commentary. It's absolutely spot on. It gets me every single time I watch it. So those two probably at Carrow Road. The away ones, I've been at a few down the years. The Madison one, where they won 1-0. I remember being in the away end for that one. That was my first away game, East Anglian derby at Portman Road, and obviously that ended well. So there's been a few, but then also I think sort of in my lifetime, 1-1's been quite a popular scoreline. So maybe those ones I sort of erase from my memory and just try and think of the wins.
Yeah, we're lucky, aren't we, for our age and what we've seen and what we've been exposed to in terms of the Old Farm derby. For me, I would have gone for, as you can sort of see from the poster up there, I would have gone for that game, but I will go for the, what do you want to call it, the Daniel Farker, Paul Lambert at Carrow Road. Man, that game was sweet. That was, the actual game itself, I remember watching it thinking, Ipswich don't look like they should be bottom of the table here, and I think Norwich are almost playing the game in second or third gear, really, and as soon as, I'm trying to think who scored the first goal. Was it Onel Hernandez, wasn't it? As soon as that goal went in, he just thought, here we go again. And you've got the Daniel Farker wink, and oh, wow, what a season that was. What a game. I'd have to pick that one. Favourite goal, Bradley Johnson's at Carrow Road, the one you've mentioned there. It was almost, that goal felt inevitable with the way Bradley Johnson was playing. Every time he had the ball at his feet, especially from any sort of distance, you thought he could have a go here. And as soon as that hit the back of the net, my goodness. And sadly now I won't be sat in that seat anymore because I'm going to be relocated by the club, which is an awful decision, but I'm very grateful that I managed to sit just behind that goal and witness that firsthand. Man, some wonderful goals down that end as well. But yeah, the East Anglian derby for us is, in our lifetimes, it has been really, really good. The last time Norwich lost to Ipswich so 16 years ago, obviously, was the 19th of April, 2009. How old were you then, Adam?
I'd have been, 9 or 10? I'd have been nearly 10. Nearly 10.
Yeah, I was 8. And just for context, I'm 25 now. So that really puts into perspective how this derby has gone over those 16 years. Should we talk about the game? I guess we kind of have to, really. Just watch the smile on my face, just slowly for those watching, just watch it go down. The game itself, Adam, Ipswich have not started the season as brightly as one might have expected. What I've got on my notes in front of me highlights that I think Norwich have been in this position before a couple of times, where you get relegated from the Premier League and you go from the promotion season of being underdogs and defying the odds to the whipping boys in the Premier League. Then you get relegated and all of a sudden you're in everyone's top 3 to then get promoted. Ipswich have spent a lot of money. We can't sort of really look past that, and we'll look into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But yeah, dare I sympathise, but I completely understand the feeling of that shift of mentality, that shift of expectation, whether it be from journalists, whether it be from fans, whether it be from players, signing for the club, expecting to be part of something brilliant and almost just expecting to slot back in. It takes some real resilience to pick yourself back up after a relegation, and with the money Ipswich have spent and the calibre of Kieran McKenna as a coach, I would imagine that things will pick up and those predictions will turn into reality. But the start of the season, Ipswich find themselves sat in 13th at the moment. They're not quite like Norwich in the loss department. They have, their results have been more draw based. Norwich sit in 19th, which is some seriously ugly reading. How do you feel going into the game? I want to put this question to you. Do you feel more, I don't want to say scared. I'm going to say scared, but I don't really mean scared because it's a game of football. But do you feel more scared this time around? Because the last time the East Anglian derby came around, both at Carrow Road and at Portman Road, the messages were, from Norwich City fans, especially on social media, were similar to how they are now, which is, well, it feels like it's an inevitable loss. But this time around, Adam, we've not got Johnny Rowe. We've not got Gabby Sara. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, if I'm trying to cling on to positives, obviously Norwich are unbeaten away from home. Not that means a lot, and the performances, as we've dissected on far too many occasions, haven't been the best. And I fear that if Norwich try and approach the game in that manner and allow Ipswich to have 26 shots or whatever Coventry had, I'd back probably some of their quality individuals, certainly in the attacking areas, to punish Norwich a lot more harshly maybe than some of the other teams have thus far on the road this season. So that's probably where I'm a little bit worried. In terms of Norwich going forward, you're kind of looking at Josh Sargent and hoping that he can be the catalyst and the leader up front. And if they can maybe get him involved in the game, and he's someone who, has been in and around it, played in derbies beforehand, he knows maybe what it means to this group of players and this club and the fan base. I think that those are kind of the key parts. Maybe I look at this game and it's maybe Norwich limiting as many Ipswich opportunities and then trying to almost do the opposite, I guess, of what they've been doing in recent games and actually taking some of their opportunities when they've got them. Difficult balance to strike, but I know the old saying is form goes out the window, but you look at it and Ipswich have won both of their last 2 home games, maybe not that convincingly. The last one against Portsmouth, I know they had a lot of opportunities in that game, and they look at the sort of final outcome 2-1, it looks like they maybe just scraped past, but I think that from sort of reading and then looking into the stats could have been a lot more convincing. You then look at the Sheffield United game, that was a side that was sort of on their knees and they really punished those with some of those individual quality attacking players, as I mentioned. I think they're in a difficult place at the moment as well. As you mentioned, it's always difficult, I think, when you come down from the Premier League because it is that mentality shift. But also for Ipswich, for a couple of years, they sort of had a group of players that had played together, for every single game. They sort of knew what was expected of them, I guess, under a head coach who had been part of the project for a couple of years, and to then go up to the Premier League and you almost lose that kind of squad unity, that mentality that group of players had, who maybe individually didn't have the same level of quality, but collectively as a unit are just so much stronger. They obviously ripped that up last year. Didn't lose too many in the summer. Some of those sort of lone players going back, and Delap obviously being maybe the headline one, Hutchinson as well. But this again, sort of a bit like maybe where Norwich have been in other seasons. got good potential players, I think, in there. You know, the lad they got, the young Norwegian, who you know, I think has got a really high ceiling, but again, at the moment, maybe isn't quite adapted fully to Championship life. And there's a few others within that core group, and I think Norwich have almost got to try and hope they catch them cold and kind of maybe. I mean, McKenna, I think generally speaking, and Ipswich under him have struggled in the big games. You know, maybe that sort of pressure has got to them, and again, that's quite a young group there as well, as similarly to Norwich, who have got, you know, a fairly young group. But I'm hoping that some of Norwich's experienced Championship leaders, the likes of Darling, the likes of Sargent, McLean if he's fit, those are the kind of players you need to rely on in this sort of game. And I think Norwich probably got more of those sort of players than what Ipswich have got. So if they can use that, then hopefully they can get on, you know, the positive side of a result. But I'm trying to talk myself into a positive mood ahead of Sunday rather than actually coming on here and openly feeling like Norwich are going to go there and get a result.
My mind tells me, just, you know, the sort of the second half of what you said there, Norwich need to go to Ipswich, and I think they almost need to make it so it's not about football, because you pitch the two up side by side, and I don't fancy Norwich in a duel when it comes to football and system and ethos. I really don't fancy us there. As you say, the experienced leaders in Norwich City's dressing room. But I mean, everyone really, they need to engage in the dark arts. They're going to have to make it ugly. They're going to have to wind the Ipswich players up. They're going to have to press. They're going to have to do something they clearly don't like doing. They're going to have to run, which, I mean, should be the bare minimum. But as we've seen so far this season, that's not quite the case. Because, as I said, you put Norwich and Ipswich head-to-head, as they are, they being the league, on Sunday. I don't know, it's a frightening prospect, and it's interesting because we've got the list of signings in front, and you've mentioned a few of them, and we will mention Marcelino Nunes. My God, I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever will happen, because something will happen with him in the game. Unless he's injured, something will happen, whether it's a red card, an own goal, a hat-trick. Something is going to make us feel weird. I'm not ready for it, but whoever the script writers are, please be generous. Please be generous. We have feelings. But Ipswich's finances have mostly been funded by Hutchinson, well, entirely, essentially, by Hutchinson and Delap. In front of us, we've got the top four clubs in terms of expenditure, and Norwich sit fourth, Ipswich top, Southampton and Wrexham in between. Interestingly, 3 of those 4 teams have a positive net spend, which, to be honest with you, I think Southampton is mostly from Tyler Dibbling, but Wrexham are the ones who are minus sort of 30 odd million in the red. So you can compare the lineups and say, well, Ipswich's cost more, which would be factually accurate. But in a world where Norwich City have almost had to defend themselves at time for net spend, I feel like that's not really an argument we want to get ourselves into. So we'll kind of avoid that. And Ipswich's recruitment strategy, I know quite early on in the window, was not perceived by their fans on social media, and we know that social media is a small sample size, but the transfer strategy, I remember sort of paying attention to it and seeing the comments, and fans weren't particularly thrilled with it. Ashley Young joined them quite early in the window, and I know the whole Shuber Akpom thing went right to deadline day, didn't it? Or near enough anyway. But as you said, that young Norwegian lad they've signed is the marquee signing. 15-16 million quid is a lot of money for a championship footballer. So the expectation on him will be quite significant. And again, Marcelino Nunes, he's someone as much as we don't want to, you have to look at him as a threat, because of all those players, quite obviously, he is the one we know the most about. And to be honest with you, in this sort of game, as was proven in the last East Anglian derby, I don't want to face him. I wouldn't want to face him, but for some bizarre reason, you know, we find ourselves in that position where we will have to come up against him. And I don't think Norwich City players should pay him special attention. I'm not one of those where I think they should just go and attack him. I want them to do it to everyone. I think they should be trying to get in everyone's heads. And, you know, you look at Darling, McLean, they're almost specialists of that. And yeah, they're going to have to make the game ugly, because footballing wise, Norwich City can't continue to do what they have been doing away from home, which is concede loads of chances. You know, Vlad made some good saves, and Darling and Medic have put in some decent shifts, but you can't just keep preying on teams to bottle their chances, because Ipswich, with the quality they've got, and, you know, as you mentioned, that Sheffield United game, when a team is on its knees, they are going to come and just sort of batter them. And I'm not saying Norwich are completely on their knees at the moment. They're not as bad as what Sheffield United have been, but we're pretty close to that. And I do not fancy a 5-0, mate. I really don't, to be quite honest with you. In terms of that tactical approach then, Adam. From what you've seen so far, what are the elements that you would pick out of Norwich City's performances under Liam Manning? What are the elements that you would like to see more of?
Yeah, I'd probably say looking at sort of I know the formation debate has been, heavily discussed. I think the fact they've now got a natural left-footed left back on the return, Mhovo came in and I thought was pretty good when he came on Wednesday night. Sort of added a little bit of energy and sort of an attacking outlet down the flanks, which they've sort of lacked maybe with Fisher playing there, because naturally he's not a left-footed left back. He's sort of having to almost be crowbarred into that position, and I'm looking at that sort of outlet as something that could be useful, particularly when you've got Stacey the other side. And I mean, I'm intrigued by what he's going to do central defensively, because clearly, Darling's a shoe-in to start. But then, Wednesday night, you kind of get the surprise of, okay, Medic has been dropped out, who, yes, I think his performances have been, 50-50. There's been some good ones, there's been some bad ones. But over the piece, I think there's a player there that is starting to grasp the Championship a little bit and starting to improve. Cordoba, yeah, for me, not really shown sort of any positives on himself thus far this season. Really struggled a little bit in sort of finding any form, and kind of, even Wednesday night, I think maybe some of where the problems were coming for Norwich in terms of what West Brom did create was kind of maybe partially due to his impact on that. And I personally would love to see them go for a midfield three. I think they've got so many good midfielders in that area that, going to Ipswich and almost having that sort of wall in front of the defence. You look at Topic, you look at Maatson, you look at McLean. So many good options in that area that could be utilised. I know Liam Manning, that's not really something he would go for. I'm not expecting that to be the case, but I think that would almost help them maybe with those sort of wider fullbacks being then able to advance and push on a little bit. That could have almost worked then if you've got Sargent and, maybe I don't know who's going to go down the wide areas, because Jurasek for me has been good when he's come on in recent games. Whether he can, I guess, kind of deal with the pressure and the intensity of a derby game, given some of his struggles so far in his whole time at Norwich, that could be a big risk to be thrown him into that sort of environment. Makama, I think, is the sort of player who might potentially have the sort of quality, I think, in that final third to offer them something. So I'd be looking at him. But yeah, let's be honest, more than likely he'll probably either go with what he's sort of gone through most of this season, maybe make the odd tweaks. I mean, McLean was sort of dropping into the defence a little bit the other night, a lot more, which is something I haven't really seen thus far. So clearly he's sort of trying a few different things, not quite found that formula yet. I know kind of when he arrived, it was all about sort of pragmatism, and Liam Manning will be able to adapt. And clearly he's worked that formulas before at other clubs that have worked in big games. So he's kind of got to utilise that, I guess, and maybe really do his research on Ipswich and sort of trying to find and pinpoint maybe the weak points and try and utilise maybe some of Norwich's individual strengths to tactically find an approach that's going to work. But right here, right now, I couldn't really define exactly what he's going to do, because every single game this season, I sort of think, okay, he's going to do that. He then goes and tweaks it and changes it and throws a little bit of a curveball, I guess.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I don't think Norwich's issues particularly lie between the defence and midfield going forward. It really is just connecting the midfield and the defence to Josh Sargent. That is something Norwich City have really struggled with. What was the can't remember what the stats were now. I think it was 15 touches for Josh Sargent against West Brom. Topic came on, had 22, 23. And I will just say that's a tweet I saw from Connor, which I'm sure will happen many more times this season. But my biggest fear is that Josh Sargent, our prolific goal scorer, as he has been just loads recently, will just end up isolated, and we'll end up with our backs to the wall. Sargent will be exhausting himself, making these weird little runs and trying to dig in deep. And it really is then just a case of, or could become a case of, will Norwich City collapse, which I'm not just going to sit here and keep saying they will, but they probably will. My biggest fear is that Norwich, when they get the ball, because they're not going to have as much possession, what are they going to try and do? We really lack that, and Wednesday is a good example of, they lack what feels like the basic structure. It feels like they lack the basic setup of a team. And Oscar Schwartau, I'm surprised I've not mentioned him yet. His performance was really good on Wednesday, and actually, as a ball carrier, I thought he took the ball forward really well, and he proved a bit of a nightmare for Campbell. Got him on a yellow card early, and then decided to not run at him again for the rest of the evening. But he is, I think he's a nailed-on start for me. Schwartau, he's going to have to do more of that. And Sargent is going to have to come in and receive the ball. And one of my biggest problems from Wednesday is what I fear going forward, which is the midfield will get the ball, and not really do much with it. But when the defence have the ball, the midfield is so static, and that for me is a system issue. It's not just an individual quality issue, because you've got almost three midfielders or two midfielders trying to do the same thing. You've got the connectors, but you've not got someone who might run with the ball or spray a long pass. Maatsen played a couple of nice balls and very clearly is a good player, but I fear if it's enough. And to be honest with you, I'm particularly fearful, but we're going to have to see some sort of creative spark. We're going to have to see Norwich City try their best to keep Josh Sargent in the game, because he's going to have to be the one who takes the chances, and he needs to score a goal sooner rather than later. Otherwise, I think his arms are just going to start getting thrown around again, and he's going to be getting frustrated. And that's one of my biggest problems with Norwich at the moment, is that we celebrated keeping Josh Sargent, and still now it's the best piece of business for, I think, any Championship club, and we're wasting it. And I'm praying to God, and he has played in two, isn't he, Josh Sargent, East Anglian derbies, but yet to score, yet to really make an impact. I'm praying to the big man upstairs that this is the first one where he might. Adam, the last thing I want to ask is, and it feels like we're kind of ending all the pods with this at the moment, but we'll talk about the theoretical side of the game for a minute. What does Sunday do for you in terms of, let's say Norwich win 2-1, and it's another sort of, what do you want to call it, a Coventry, a Stoke, where they managed to pick up the 3 points, or even a point, to be honest with you. Where does that leave you compared to where maybe if Norwich, say, lose 2 or 3-0, like, is there going to be a big difference for you? Does it almost buy Manning some more time? Like, just give me some of the theories that you have on how certain results could affect Norwich and your sort of mentality towards them.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because this game in isolation is purely about result. I think, I've always been a big firm believer that, certainly in an early part of the season under a different manager, new project, different group of players, for me, it's less about result, it's about performance. However, that's not going to cut the mustard on Sunday. If Norwich go and perform really well but lose 1-0, then unfortunately it will be reacted to in the same head-loss manner as maybe a 3-0 defeat would be, just because of the manner of the game and what it means and everything that's on the line for all the reasons we've already outlined so far, the 16-year record and sort of the pressure that brings and sort of the pride that gives Norwich City fans.
Would you still be there with performance, though? So, for example, say Norwich lost, 2-1. They took an early lead but lose 2-1. But then, say they have 59% possession. They have 3 times the shots and 3 times the shots on target. Obviously, result for this is very important. Say that happens. Do you then maybe take a step back and look at it from a wider perspective? How would that make you feel?
Yeah, I think if it was any other game, if it was maybe like for example, if it was the West Brom game, and I sort of do have a little bit more positive feeling after that game, having dissected that and maybe sort of looked at it a little bit more in detail and kind of the opportunities Norwich carved out, and it was a marked step forward in terms of the quality of the performance as a whole over the 90, rather than maybe some of the sort of 20-30 minute bursts we've seen, but consistently nowhere near enough. I think unfortunately for Liam Manning, Sunday's got to almost be both. It's got to be 1, not a defeat, and 2, probably a pretty decent performance, because I think even if they do go there and they scrape a 1-1 in sort of the Stoke or the sort of Coventry fashion, the sort of pride and happy feeling of Norwich remaining unbeaten will be great, but it doesn't, for me, mask the wider problems that this season thus far has thrown up. It then probably, unfortunately, would then buy Liam Manning a couple more weeks, over the international break. You then go into that big game against his former team at home, and there would just be so much pressure riding on that. And then you kind of look at the schedule, I guess, after that, and it's back-to-back away games that week. Tuesday away at Derby, Saturday away at Swansea, and it's like, then if you get to that point and maybe they do lose that Bristol City home game, the levels of toxicity would just be off the charts. And then if you're having to then maybe look at him and his role, it then becomes a little bit messy, because then you're probably having to find potentially interim managers if that's the route that Ben Napper decides to take. And I think there would be a lot of pressure on him at that point, from within the football club maybe, and certainly from the outside, because this season then would be 10 games in and not panning out in the fashion that anybody would want it to, or the goals that were quite clearly set out at the start of the season. This group would be in and around and challenging for the top 6, and they look a million miles off that at the moment. So it's tough because as much as I want to see a result and, the performance for one game in isolation is probably not so much of my concern. It's probably what happens thereafter as well, in that next block of games. And, clearly international breaks give sporting directors and football clubs good chances to make changes if they do feel it needs to be done, because it then gives them a bit of time to sort of scout the market, I guess, and maybe bring somebody in and give them a little bit of time to work with a group of players. And, I'm certainly not coming on record and saying that Norwich should or will sack Liam Manning for anybody that's, potentially going to try and spin what I say at any point. But unfortunately, with the sort of levels of apathy and the feeling, unfortunately, I think Sunday is big for Liam Manning in his future, because regardless of result, he's going to be judged pretty heavily, and a win probably would buy him a little bit of time. But however, it feels a little bit Dean Smith-esque that maybe 2-3 games down the line, if the results then haven't changed, we're probably looking at that being like, yeah, that game didn't really change the wider picture.
I completely agree with every point there. And Sunday presents this, we're not going to call it, it's not last chance saloon, is it? It's not one final sort of throw of the dice. It's an interesting opportunity for Liam Manning to basically almost, I don't think it would get everyone back on side, but there is that chance to really just almost scoop a lot of Norwich City fans up and go, look, here we go. Because if they get that win, regardless of style, the emotion will always override the performance, and for an East Anglian derby, it will always override performance levels and stats. It's always about emotion. And in a world, which is this world, where I'm trying to be positive and looking for things to believe in, I completely agree with you. And actually, my feelings, this is, has been quite the opposite compared to the other games this season. My feelings towards Wednesday have increased in terms of optimism based off of the performance. Once I take that emotional feeling after the game, that walk home from Carrow Road, once I take that out of my mind, actually, I think, right, okay, it wasn't as bad as what we have been seeing. And now Sunday, of all the games to play at this point in the season that Norwich City find themselves in, Liam Manning has got that chance to go to Portman Road, pull off a massive upset, and get people back on side. And actually, that will be what probably turns around the atmosphere at Carrow Road for Bristol City. I think the only thing really that could is a win, but maybe even a draw. But also, I think a resilient performance and a draw would. There's plenty of ways that everyone can sort of be given optimism and brought almost back on board. But we will, I guess we'll see how that develops, because sat here right now, so it's now Friday evening, which should be a fun time. But for me, I'm just thinking about Sunday. Obviously, you're going, aren't you, Adam? So I wish you the very best of luck with that. But yeah, it's a scary prospect. And is there anything you want to add? I feel like we've covered most bases there.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I can sort of draw a parallel to is almost that Daniel Farke 1-1 game, Mo Leitner grabbing the equaliser. At that point in time, it was Daniel Farke massively under pressure, a Norwich group that had started the season terribly. They went to Portman Road, and, the feeling probably heading into that game, much maybe like the David Wagner reverse game at Portman Road the last time out, was low, and the expectation was low. And then Norwich pulled off a form result. Yes, only a draw in both of those games, but that was the springboard to more positive results. And obviously, we know what happened in that Daniel Farke season, and even that David Wagner campaign. That was a group that almost kind of came together, and that siege mentality sort of started to shine through, and they ended up going on and achieving the top six. And we can dissect the way that all ended, and we have done that already. We don't need to go over that ground again, but that's kind of how they've got to look at this game, I think, on Sunday. If they can get any form of result, it could be a potential springboard to more positive things. So that's my last thought heading into Sunday. So hopefully come Monday or Tuesday when we do the next podcast, we can look back on it on a positive result, and we're not sort of having to, sort of dig, I guess, ourselves back up after a defeat that would end a pretty long-standing record.
Yeah, it's a chance to steady the ship, isn't it, for fans, players, staff, whoever. That chance is there. We're praying to God that Norwich City grab it and run with it. That's all for this video. The two things I want to say: thank you for 200 subscribers. Woohoo. The other thing, and I feel like I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, so if you're still listening, thank you. But we are now on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So we saw a couple of people asking about that. Turns out it's a lot easier than what I thought. So you'll find us there now if you don't want to look at our hopefully smiling faces, or as we have been so far, very sour faces. Go and find us there. The links for that will be in the description. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. Thanks for all the comments. We've had loads of comments recently, which is, what we're doing it for. We're doing it to talk to everyone about football. But yeah, that's enough thank yous. Our fingers and toes are firmly crossed for a positive result and a reason to smile on Sunday evening. So until then, enjoy the weekend as best you can, and we'll see you in the next one.